really last minute last night.
All right.
Also, the patient that I used, I literally have not seen since like October.
That's fine.
I don't really know how to do the patient outcome measures with him.
You just may not be able to. That's all right. The bigger idea with that is, again, to get you thinking about these as a routine tool that you could use as part of your initial evaluation. The using them is very simple. You hand them a piece of paper, they fill it out. A few weeks later, you hand them the piece of paper, they fill it out, and you see if there's improvement. It's more thinking about it. So, all right. What, if anything, do you need help with? Again, you can either type it in. That's easier. You can just talk. What do you need help with at this point?
Sorry. Right.
I just love watching the words pop up, I think, sleep. I'm with you on that, but probably less legitimate than you guys. Time allotment, that is always figuring out the appropriate balance of all of those sorts of things and understanding. And part of what I do like about the side effects of everything going on is that's a very professional level issue as far as time allotment. Going forward in your careers, you won't have, as many specific due dates or, like people telling you you need to spend this amount of time here, this amount of time there. And so learning how to allot your time and where you may need to cut back from or, like do less than perfect is a worthwhile skill, specifically here in the this evidence-based medicine course and this evidence-based medicine process. The number one reason that professionals say that they don't use evidence-based practice, all of these things that we're talking about, is because they don't have the time, right? And I usually come back with this, and a few of you have been asking in like your flip classes, like, when am I going to use this? Like trying to figure out when and how this goes through. And the best answer I legitimately have for this is evidence-based practice is a time-saving area, because one of the main presence of evidence-based practice is to only do the most effective treatment, right? So to eliminate ineffective treatments and focus on effective treatments. And so if you think back on some of these things that don't work or you feel don't work, but you just do anyway, right? Using evidence-based practice guidelines with that and the principles will help you remove some of those and hopefully free up some time. But time allotment is something that you will always need to be working on, specifically in the areas of professional development, so that you allocate a certain amount of time each day or at least each week to be growing as a professional. So although it is never fun to be in time crunches, it is a worthwhile skill to practice. So since we met last time, you turned in these 2 assignments. How comfortable, confident are you in what you did? So looks like a, decent range, but at that same note, compared to some of these things and these being relatively new, I'm fairly happy with being in the middle here with this, that initial note component being something that you guys have probably done, but not at the level that we were talking about. And so part of it is with this, either you will spend a lot more time practicing and getting prepared at this, or if you're doing these initial notes at 70% of what we're learning in class, you will be doing it above average in the field of athletic training, which is somewhat depressing, but also, the goal here, where you can slack in certain areas if you know where you're cutting corners with that. And then on the patient-rated outcome measures with that, that is definitely something that requires practice, but it is going to be simply selecting ones that are appropriate. And usually that becomes a group discussion. So you as a clinic would say, what sort of outcome assessments do we want to use? And then for all the shoulder people, you would use similar outcome measures, and they would fill it out before and after and apply those. And so we will look more into some of those as well. So questions from your flipped class assignments or video lessons that you want to make sure we cover during this time right away. And if you don't have any, that is acceptable as well. I do have some questions for us that will hopefully guide some discussion, or at least some thought-provoking situations for you. And then we will have an opportunity for questions again at the end. So does anybody have any pressing questions or something that they really want to make sure we cover?
All right, now.
All right. Then let's play around with some questions here. Oops, did one pop up there at the end? Exam examples. Okay. I will hit some of those at the end there. So test, retest reliability can be both positive and negative, true or false. Two true, one false, and it is false on that. Test, retest reliability. When you're thinking can be positive or negative, you're thinking of correlation analysis, right? With that. And test, retest reliability is a correlation, but you can't have an inverse correlation, right? The fact that one person scores high would not ever mean that another person would automatically score or test low in that area, right? It's really how accurate in a positive correlation. So test, retest reliability is only positive correlation from 0 to 1, with 1 being higher. Now, it's not, truly a % agreement, but that's the easiest way for me to think about it, right? And then you usually subtract in there. So if you think of it like a B or an A, a B is pretty good, right? So that'd be like a 0.8. If it's an A at 0.9, that's really good, right? A C at 0.7 or a D, at 0.6, that's, getting by maybe, and below that is, failing. That's the way I usually think about this for test, retest reliability. And some of that will then be determined then as far as the acceptability of a measure being like how, stable is the principle. right? If you're testing, say, something like range of motion over the course of like 15 minutes, you would expect that to be relatively stable. But if you're assessing something like depression score, right, that would have wide fluctuations day to day with the individuals, regardless of the stability of the measure. So you have to consider what's being measured as well and compare that to other tests. So in the situation here, what type of validity is described? A group of experts reviews the instrument, often a questionnaire or survey, and arrives at a consensus that the instrument covers aspects of the concept it is intended to measure. So we have face validity, content validity, and criterion validity. All right. Oops. That is actually content validity. So if we look now at the different types of validity, right? Face validity is when you just look at it yourself, or you just look at it and on its face, you know, it seems to be similar, right? So like a face validity component would be like if you measured height with a tape measure versus, you know, a line on the wall, right? With there, you know, you probably don't need to actually assess that. On its face, it would be similar in nature with that. Criterion related validity then is when we take something that is already considered valid and we take the new measure and we compare it to that measure, right? So think of criterion as like the gold standard criterion, right? We're comparing the new measure to the old measure, and we're using the old measure's determined validity as now the new measure. Now, that obviously takes a lot of time and a lot of testing with that. So kind of a middle ground is this content related validity, where we take a group of experts and they assess it and they give it validity based off of their own assessment. So you can think of this as expert opinion validity. Does that make sense? Somewhat in there? All right. What three things are you generally evaluating a research article for? So when I'm reading a research article, what sort of things am I judging it for, right? Not what am I reading it for as in like to get things, but whether or not I'm deciding this is a useful article. What three things are there? And maybe just give me your top one that you're thinking about. Validity, reproducibility, and accuracy, right? Both of those are there. Credibility, right? Another way of kind of describing that as well. I think I have the list here, right? So you're right. When we look at credibility, you're talking about the concept of both valid and reliable together, right? So we have validity, that it's measuring what it says it's going to measure. Two, that it's reliable and it's reproducible. And then three, the third one, is it clinically applicable, right? And we talk about clinical applicability a variety of different ways, whether or not there is good external validity as far as its generalizability to other populations, and then specifically to your patient, or whether or not this is more of a lab-based assessment. So what would be the most critical appraisal in the given situation? So basically, of those three, if there's a new treatment technique available for the prevention of hamstring strains that is based on a series of self-stretches, are we most interested in the study's validity, reliability, or clinical applicability? And these are all subjective in nature and are more designed to spark conversation than answers. All right, a couple votes for reliability and validity, right? And when you look at this, like I said, there really isn't ever a true correct answer in these situations. It needs to be all of the same. But if we were going to go through with this, right, because it's a new treatment technique in the prevention of hamstring strains, right, we need to make sure that it is valid in the fact that their measures actually measure the prevention of hamstring strains. But that would be relatively simple to assess, so probably not as important. Clinical applicability would be also important from the standpoint, are they testing people that are at risk of hamstring strains as well? But of the most important there would probably be the reliability from the standpoint of, can you reproduce the treatment technique, right? If you don't have enough information or the treatment technique is not reproducible, it's something crazy that one person does, it doesn't matter if it's valid or clinically applicable, because I would not be able to use it, right? So that's just examples of how those sorts of things can work. Somebody's not having a good morning. Which participation selection method would make you the most confident in the applicability of the research to your patient in the situation below? Right? The population of interest includes everyone that matches the inclusion and exclusion criteria. That's just a fact, right? To make sure we talk about that. Your patient is in the population of interest, so you're interested in implying the results. So basically, what I'm asking you here is, of these different types of participation selection, what works out most accurate? Hey, buddy. What is most accurate for identifying your population of interest if your participant includes everything within there? Can you tell them to answer right? What answer do you think? Do you like answer 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? I know which, yeah, that people are voting. Which one do you think, David? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You like 4?
I'm already past 4.
I didn't put the right answer in here. The right answer here would be random sampling. And let's look at, I believe I have, yeah, all of these. All right, so this is more of a definition type question with a little bit of a twist in there. I'm more interested that you know what these different definitions are. So in random sampling, every person has an equal chance, right? That is the most true representation of the sample of interest. However, there are times then where based off of our research model or our research thoughts, we're going to change it from pure random to one element of either, think of it as proportionality. Either I'm going to use some sort of external device with there, that's systematic random sampling. You see this in hospital type studies where they use hospital identifying numbers or whatever with this. But then it's either stratified or proportional stratified sampling. So stratified sampling says is if there are both men and women in my population of interest, I want to make sure that I include both men and women in my sample. So I could either say, well, in order to do that, I want equal numbers of men and women so I can evaluate the effects of sex and gender. Or I could say, if my population is 75% men and 25% women, I want my population to be 75% men and 25% women, right? Now, you would expect proportional sampling and random sampling to be the most similar, because if there's a true random nature, then it would come out to close to being proportional. But sometimes you will then randomly sample from these different groups to make sure each of the groups are identified. Now, that being said, most of the time when we get to sampling, which is different from group allocation, right? Do you understand the difference between sampling and group allocation?
I don't remember.
Okay. Group allocation, or we'll start sample. So you have your population of interest, everybody that meets your inclusion or exclusion criteria, right? So let's say that I want to study soccer players, right? And so my inclusion and exclusion criteria are collegiate soccer players, right? So that's my population of interest. Now I need to select people that are going to participate in my study. If I did a random sampling, every person that is a collegiate soccer player in the world would be eligible to be there and could be selected to be in my study. Stratified random sampling would be, okay, I know there are men and women soccer and I want them equal, so I'm going to select half of my study to be men, half of my study to be women. Proportional would be that, and then convenience would be, well, I'm going to just study soccer players at Augustine, right? And so from there, then I recruit. So this is about recruitment. Allocation is about then assigning groups. So that's the difference. Okay, stop blitz. All right, the placebo effect can have a strong effect. What must not be present to have a placebo effect? Another way to answer this question is what is designed to eliminate placebo effects? And it is a internal control. Need your fingernails cut. Control, yeah. Bias. I'm doing this right now, buddy. I'm teaching class. So when we look at placebo effect, the specific component of control to avoid placebo effects is blinding, specifically of the participants. So there's 3 levels of blinding, right? Participant blinding, a researcher blinding and allocation or assessment blinding. All right, so when we do that, the idea is we're trying to eliminate any mental effects of believing that you're getting the treatment by people not knowing. So if the researcher knows, if the participant knows, or if the evaluator knows whether or not they received the treatment or not, there's the potential for this placebo effect to affect the results. The ability to interpret results is dependent on the study's what? All right, you go play now, okay? Or at least you have to sit on your own chair. All right. And the ability to interpret is the result of validity, either internal or external validity. Right? So when you think of this, think of reliability as reproducibility. Right? Can I reproduce this? Validity then is, can I trust it to do what it says it does, right? So can I interpret the results as in, like, can I take these results and interpret them into a different situation? And then clinically applicable is, can I use these results? So which of the following is a threat to external validity?
I need to do that.
So looking at these then, oops. You must not have saved the last version, because I know I put the definitions of these in there, but that's okay. When we look at then these, we have three measures or three threats to internal validity. This is the threat to external validity and the threat to statistical validity. All right. So we'll start with the correct answer, interaction of treatment and history. This is the fact that in certain situations, right, based off of the history of the study in question, so how the study was done, there's a possibility that these results could only be found in this very specific situation. That's the interaction between treatment and history. And if there is the inability or some reason to cause the inability of us to trust these results beyond the situation immediately described, that's a threat to external validity, or external validity being then the external validity being the ability to use this information in another situation, or generalizability, right? Maturation is a threat to internal validity. Anytime there is a change in time, people naturally change over time. Those natural changes are maturation effects, right? So that's a threat to internal validity. If I'm testing somebody over the course of 6 months, there are all sorts of things changing with that individual beyond just what was done before. Okay, mortality then is dropout. So that's a threat to internal validity. If there's a lot of dropout or people that drop out, that could change the effects in there. Compensation rivalry is the idea then that if individuals know what groups they're in and they believe that they're receiving a lesser treatment, they may try harder to be better to make up for that, right? So if they believe that, let's say that they believe that you're testing somebody and they're doing strength and you're trying a different strength training technique, right? And they believe that the new strength training technique isn't as good. They're still trying to improve their strength. So they may just have to try harder when they're working out, try harder in the testing to make up for it. So we're missing a few of these because it has the old, oh, there's the definitions. So it's in there. Here's your definitions of those. So I just didn't eliminate that question. So here's your definitions, right? Internal validity threat, external validity threat, maturation, mortality, compensation, rivalry, interaction of treatment and history, and statistical power. So I'll give you a second to read over those, but these are right out of your text as well. But if you have any questions about that? What? Grab my soda.
I'm not going to see that. You can do that.
Okay. You're trying to figure out if a new diagnostic instrument is effective in identifying a condition. What type of validity would be most powerful? So if you remember the three different types, we have face validity, we have content validity, and we have criterion validity. I guess if I was going to give you the three, I don't really know why I made this an open-ended question, but. Right, and it is criterion validity. All right, questions you still have from video lessons 6 through 9. We have exam examples. I will pull that up as well while anybody else has any other questions.
You awake over there?
Mm-hmm. Let's see. And find one from from today. All right, so here's an example of a question. Most of the questions are much more how to describe definition oriented than what you're seeing in this. So like I asked you a question with before on sampling methods, right? And I asked you like in the form, given this situation, which one would be most appropriate, right? Here's much more straightforward. So if the entire population represents multiple groups and the researcher wants to make sure that all groups are included equally, what type of sampling method would be most appropriate? Systematic random sampling, stratified random sampling, proportional random sampling, or cluster sampling, right? And the answer being stratified random sampling, right? Because stratified random sampling takes different groups within the population of interests and assigns a certain number of them to a equal number of them to each area, right? So if I'm studying 10 people and I'm studying and I want to do a stratified random sampling, and I'm doing men and women, I would make sure that there are 5 men and 5 women, even if in my population of interest there are 10 men and only 5 women. That means that every woman would be selected to be included in my study, right? With that. So another one here, external validity of a study is affected by what? Inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria, subject allocation, and blinding. Right, and that's inclusion criteria, the idea that in order, the more strict the more strict the inclusion criteria, the less generalizable it is. So those sorts of questions. Single blinding refers to the blinding of what group, right? And that's researchers, just the definition of single blinding. Does that kind of help as far as figuring out what sort of things are?
How
A
many
lot
questions?
of definitions. The first midterm is 75, I believe, because it's kind of based on the way it goes. I think about 2/3 of the course is on the first midterm, 1/3 of the course is on the last midterm. And there's no comprehensive anything on that. And I think the first midterm we said was what?
Tuesday.
Like a week from Wednesday? Yeah.
The first
So just over a week away.
midterms.
What?
The first midterm, is there multiple midterms?
Yeah, I just call them midterm as in like a test in the middle of the term.
Okay, and then the final.
There is no final. So it might as well be called Unit 1 exam and Unit 2 exam. I don't know why I decided to call it midterm 1 and midterm 2 opposed to Unit 1 and Unit 2, but
How do you want us to go about studying the vocabulary? Like, do we just study the important words?
oh, define an unimportant vocabulary word.
Well, no, like when we go through the chapters, do we look at the words that they're like mostly talking about?
Like, I mean, I would go with the bolded words.
Okay. Cool,
Yes.
that's all I needed to know.
Yes, the bolded words. And the nice thing is both of these textbooks have glossaries as well. So I would focus on the in-text kind of defining of the word as well as the glossary, and see if you can kind of link those two.
Right.
How you learn vocabulary words.
See, so they're important because they're bolded.
Yeah, I thought you were talking about like, which of the bolded words do I not need to study?
No. I was just trying to figure out what words to study.
The bolded words.
Okay.
Right. I mean, there are some concepts and stuff in there as well, but most of those will come from just applying two definitions, So like, here's one. What type of study design is most effective at describing the outcomes of novel treatments? Right? So the case series, cohort studies, experimental studies, qualitative studies. So you need to know the definitions of those. And then that that a case study is the study of one specific instance, right? Whereas a cohort study is now lots of people, but allocated according to their groups, experimental studies and qualitative studies. So of those, if we have a novel treatment, that means that not a lot of people have gotten it, which means that we wouldn't have a lot of ability to, do a large experimental or cohort study. Qualitative study has nothing to do with this. So therefore the answer would be case study or case series, right? Because it's novel. We don't want to do a huge experiment on something that we have no idea whether it works. So we would do a much more limited study, which would be a case study or case series. Does that make sense how I'm using like a definition, and then I guess I'm using in this case the definition of a novel treatment, which isn't a vocabulary word, but. Other questions on video lessons 9 through 6? Or, I mean, anything in that realm. So before next time, we have a few assignments again. Nice thing is these are all of the assignments you have to do between now and Tuesday. So like I said, the semester project is slowing down in there. You have your patient outcome and initial note. These are the same as you just did, but in a different patient. And then you have a daily note due for each patient. So how comfortable or confident are you in your understanding of what you need to do in these assignments, or how to do them? And hey, look at that. See, we are growing. Right? We're much more comfortable in our future ability than in our past ability in these. So that is great. Right? That is great. Still, again, with this patient-rated outcome measure, with the initial visit with that, when you look at that aspect, it is easier than I think you think about it. Literally, all you're doing is you're selecting one that you think should be applicable, and you're giving it to the patient and having them fill it out. Right? I think I do ask you to explain why you selected that, but that could literally be, my patient's an athlete with a shoulder problem, so I selected the dash because that includes questions about athletic activity for the shoulder. Done. Okay. Questions about the semester project? or just move to the next one. Questions about anything? Okay, well, I'm thinking about, well, I'm not thinking, I pretty much decided. I think I'm going to move these sessions to like Tuesday and Thursday evening, maybe when we can get more participation and people aren't like half asleep. If you have suggestions on what time of day, that would be, obviously it's probably, it's got to be like after 6 or 7 when people are done with clinic. I understand some people will be traveling during that, and that's just kind of the way that it works with that. So if that doesn't work for you and you really are finding these valuable, then I'm more than willing to go through these more individually with you. But I'm hoping that we can get more of our classmates involved, and maybe, we will be in a, I don't know, more lively mood in the evening. So I will let you know about that before Tuesday. But if you do have suggestions on a time, please send them my way. All right? Unless
Okay.
anybody has anything else. I have been recording these, and I will make sure I send them out as well from that. And I just need to remember, if you have not received an invitation to the playlist by the end of the day, please remind me, because what I'm doing is just uploading these to a YouTube playlist. And then that way they would just be available as they're there, opposed to emailing them out and flooding your emails. All right?
Sounds good.
Question.
All right. Enjoy
James.
the rest of your day. My advice is to get some caffeine in your system as soon as possible.
I